Hi, my name is Jenny Wong-Stanley. I am a woodbender by trade, and today we are here at my studios at Lawson Foundries located in Oakland, California. I am very excited to have you here because we're going to demonstrate how to make a bentwood iPad holder. So just to tell you a little bit about the final product, this is held together. This is just a piece of white oak held together by a through mortise and tenon joint. And it's very modern, it's very simple, but it's pretty cool. So it sits this way and your iPad could go here, or you could turn it around. It sits in two positions. You can have it at a lower recline right here, and your iPad can sit snugly this way. And once you learn how to make this initial shape, you can modify it to your own taste by doing different embellishes, coloring, staining, and even changing the size. So just wanted to show you that. Before any of the modifications, before we actually get to the cool part, which is the bending, we're gonna have to make our initial form. This is actually the only form we're gonna make, so initial wasn't the right term. But we're gonna make one form. This is it. It's gonna help to get us at a pretty deep and steep bend. What we have right here is just a bunch of plywood cobbled together to get this form. And you can use anything you have in your shop. And the reason why we have a cork is to protect it from any little divots that we couldn't sand out. And that happens a lot too. So don't worry about that. We're gonna get into the nitty-gritty just a little bit. And the reason why we need the form is when we bend the wood around the form, which is what we're gonna do, the form protects the splintering of the inside of the wood and at its weakest points. And for this particular bend, the weakest points is at the corner right here. So we're gonna hold it together like this, and it's gonna prevent any of the splintering from inside. So without further ado, let's talk about making this. Here I have a piece of thick plywood that I cobbled together. It's two pieces of 3/4 ply from previous job that I glued up. All you need is a thick piece of wood. So if you have some hardwood scraps left over, that'll work. Thinner ply, you want to cobble it together. This particular one builds up to about 1.5 inches, just like, you know, around there is fine. If you want a little bit thicker, you have some 1-inch ply, 2 inches is fine. We're gonna make 3 forms, and we're gonna glue them all up, which will make a thick form approximately 4.5 inches. So what we're going to need is our writing instrument, marker, pencil, whatever you're comfortable with, an eraser. Have my combo. I have my angle ruler and my straight edge. Very necessary. And finally, I'm lucky. I'm using my water cup to make the corners and the reference for the hole saw. My hole saw happens to be 2 1/8 inch in diameter. This happens to be 2 1/4 inch in diameter, so it'll make a perfect reference for me as to where to drill. And before we begin, I really want to talk about the wood that you're going to use to bend. So here I have a piece of white oak that is 24 inches long, 1/8 in thickness, and approximately 6 inches in width. You can find this at a hardware store. You can find this, well, probably not a hardware store. I take that back. A specialty lumber shop, a specialty veneer shop. You can probably order it online. And if you feel so inclined, go ahead and resaw this yourself. This is a very odd thickness for a veneer. This is very thick. But if you go to a veneer store and the thickest they have is 3/32, that would work as well. See what you can find. I have a piece of white oak that I'm working with. And if you can't find white oak, there are other alternatives to what you can use that are also really good bendable wood. If you have English brown oak, that's cool. Ash is cool too. Very good bendable wood. Here I have some butternut. It's not as dense as oak or ash, but it's a pretty good bending wood. I would probably just stick to those guys that I just mentioned. So let's begin making our form. So the base of this form, I want it to be at least 7 inches. And since we cut this piece of pie into a manageable size. I'm gonna try to get 2 of them in here. 7 inches in base. We're gonna round those corners. And always make a middle mark, right? If you want to, you could square it off. Sometimes it helps as a reference. I've done that before. It just kind of helps my eye keep my form within a form. I know it's odd. And take your angle, and I'm going to angle this particular form to be 75. So come close. If you want to build your form to be a little thicker, to be precisely the width of your wood, go ahead. I'm just showing you how I like to do it. I always tend to build my form a little bit thinner so I can see the edges of the wood. I don't know why, it's a thing. I like to see how it warps or doesn't warp. And I have built forms that you can extend to the whole piece of wood. It's not necessary, but it does help if you're worried about the corner splintering, the edge of the corner splintering, I should say. So I am just bringing the straight edge straight up. It's just a reference for me. The form is not going to be that tall. I'm going to take my trusty water cup and round the corners. This is the initial bending form and the only form actually, but we are going to modify the bend as we get along in the process later on, because we're going to have to modify the bend in order to do our mortise, through mortise and tenon joint. And I will show you how to do that. Okay, so we have that, the overall triangle form here, and we're just gonna decide where do we want our holes. So I want one on top, right? That's important. You want to clamp the top of your wood onto the form on both sides. And as you're drawing the holes, give your walls a little bit of space. You want to not have your walls thinner than a quarter, because you just never know how much tension you're going to put in your clamps. It's usually a lot. It's between a lot and a lot and a lot. Okay, here we have it. So what we're going to do right now is bring this over and hole saw these holes with our drill press. And then we're going to take this form after we cut it out on the bandsaw and copy it over here. We're at our drill press, and just keep in mind that the stencil that I use is slightly bigger than the hole saw, so you want to make sure that you position so this is in the middle. And that's it. We're just going to drill 3 holes right here, and then finally we're going to run it through the bandsaw and start to compile our final form.
And it's okay if you have a little bit of tear out. This will be glued together. We can just peel off this or sand it down.
We are at the bandsaw right now, and what I'm gonna do is probably transfer this form when we're done onto a much larger piece of the same ply. I had a chunk of this board that I made, and we're gonna try to cut into this right now so it becomes a more manageable size. So I'm gonna slice this off, all the excess material, and then we're gonna start concentrating on the corners by making rough cuts and actually cutting around to alleviate some of the stress from the blade. All right, here we go. I'm gonna turn this on. Something with rounded corners, I always find, and this is just my method, that lopping off giant chunks, such as this, it makes it so much easier to work with when you actually want a more precise form, especially if you're cutting with a really thin blade. And what I'm using right now is a 1/4 inch blade for woodworking blade. And what I'm going to do right now is try to shape these corners by cutting relief cuts on the bandsaw and then cutting around it so we don't stress the blade.
here we have it. This is the form. The next step would be to try to round all the edges off and to make it as smooth as possible. But before we do that, we're gonna need 2 more of these. So we're gonna cut 2 more to look exactly like this. Here we go. What we're doing here is to step and repeat. But what I'm gonna do that's different is to use the original form that we just finished making and make sure we try to get it to look exactly the same, the other two to be exactly the same. So when we glue it up, it will align almost perfectly. Almost perfect is good for me right now. So what we're doing is just drawing 2 more of these. And I'm also going to draw in the circle. And we know that we're going to cut those out. Now I like to leave room for error every time I am free cutting on the bandsaw because, you know, there's drift. Mine happens to drift to the left a little bit. And I can correct it, but there'll always be something. So just in case you didn't fix your drift or you don't have a steady hand, you didn't have enough coffee, whatever the reason, just leave a little space between the forms in case you get out of bounds. Always helps me. So here we have it. And we are just going to cut these 2 forms out. We're going to glue all 3 little forms to make a giant master form. We are done with cutting 3 of the forms. We're going to glue it all up. First, what we're going to need to do is to try to get some of the tear out off so each piece can lay comfortably on top of each other. And it's good for your hands. You don't want to splinter. And your glue paraphernalia. Also, have some clamps on hand. I have some 12-inch Irwins here. And let's see. Oh, yes. And if you want, for a tighter grip and more tension, some scrap wood. So I have 4 pieces of scrap wood right here. So let's begin. I am going to do my best without getting jabbed by a few splinters. And it doesn't have to be a perfect job. You just want very much to take all the yuckiness off. So what we're going to do now is glue it up. Glue. And please make sure you have a damp cloth. The reason why you need a damp cloth is to help with cleanup afterwards in case any of the glue creeps out all around. It's just easier to clean up while the glue is still wet. Now, let's start with the bottom part. I like tight bond, various versions of it. But as long as it's wood glue, it should be good. Snap this down. So, if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm trying to align the holes. There we go. So now that we have a pretty decent alignment, it does not have to be perfect. What is important is to get the bottom lined up. So if you want to, what you can do is put it on a flat surface. Right, and this is very important to have the bottom of it lined up. by doing that, flat surface, you know that you will have pretty good leveled bottom. Let's do this part first. Now remember, the glue is slick and it's gonna wanna move around. So make sure you secure to the best of your ability, and you may have to adjust as you keep going. But again, the bottom and this part is the most important for this particular form. So as long as those are lined up and the holes are relatively lined up, you're good to go. I'm just securing most of it right now. There we go. Whoopsie. Yes. So what you're looking for right now is the creeping of glue. Start to spread. I'll put some more clamps here. So now that we have our form secured and ready to go, we're going to play the waiting game. And the reason why I'm going to give it a lot more time than necessary, I'm going to give this one 12 to 24 hours. So we're going to worry about what's going to come next tomorrow. Right now, we're at the belt sander. I'm going to don my gear. We're going to sand this just a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to smooth out all those rough edges. In case you're wondering, the sanding paper that's on my belt sander is a medium grit, approximately 120, and this is great just to sand some of the rough edges right out and quickly. So if you want, feel free to go over it with a lighter grit, maybe a 220, but I think it's unnecessary since we're gonna go ahead and cover it with some cork right now. If you don't have cork, you can try some gauze or canvas, anything just to sort of take and to give it a smoother bending surface. So we are at just a flat surface, and I have my cutting board, cork. The form is approximately 4 1/4 in its width. What we're gonna do right now, and the piece of wood that we're gonna use is 6 inches, so it's gonna be slightly bigger than the form on both sides, but that's okay. And when we get to bending, you'll understand why. So if your cork is not exactly 4 1/4, as we have right here, it's okay if it just goes out of line a little bit. I'm gonna mark it. And I'm going to cut the cork, and you can, again, use whatever material that you have, just line it, but make sure the material is stiff enough and flat enough. So, use my guide here. And shave off 4 inches. I like to use an X-Acto knife. If you don't have an X-Acto knife, go ahead and use your scissors. Now remember, this form, no one is going to see it. It is a tool for the final product.
So if there's a little bit of a mistake here or there, as long as it's usable, don't fret. It'll be okay. And a quarter. Okay, if it's slightly larger, slightly smaller, that's all right. We are going to use resin. You could use wood glue. I would prefer wood glue, but I'm using 5-minute resin as a cheat to get the cork to set on our form quicker so we can get to the super fun part, which is the bending. So I'm going to use my 5-minute quick cure. You should follow their whatever epoxy you're using or whatever glue you're using. Just, you know, make sure you follow the information they provide. I know how to do this, so I am going to mix this. It's 1 for 1. I'm just using scrap. This is like where my nails were at one point in time. And the important part about resin, if you happen to be using resin, is to have equal parts. I would normally use a scale to measure it, but I have a trick that I've adopted, where I do equal variable lines of a squeeze. So I know how much resin I'm getting out. It is not exact, but it's been working for me, so I'm going to use it again. Again, you could use wood glue. I would prefer wood glue, but then we're gonna have to wait. So for today, and for this demonstration, only for this part, we're gonna forego the wood glue I'm waiting. And this is my adopted cheat. All right. Have a piece of scrap. I broke this off. Trick to resin. Mix well. Have really, really good ventilation, or wear a mask. I have good ventilation, and this is a very small portion. You want to be safe. The reason why I have goggles on is I do not want epoxy resin in my eyeball. I've had numerous things in my eyeballs before, and never pleasant. I have to say metal is by far the worst. I'll leave that one to your imagination. All right, thoroughly mixed. And we're gonna spread this liberally. I have gloves on because resin is an irritant. You do not want this on your skin. It's yucky and gooey and fairly gross. If you get it on your skin, get some denatured alcohol or some paint thinner, whatever you have on hand. It's probably not good for you as well, but it will help you quickly take the resin off. Want to get it to the end, spread liberally. To the best of your ability. If you need to mix again, that's okay. We are going to set this. And I'm going to do this asymmetrically. You're like, what? Why? I have my reasons. And they will show through when we get to the bending part. So one side of the cork will be shorter. One side will be longer. And it's so weird. Resin is like warm, you know, when it's mixed up. It's like you feel the chemical reaction. I am putting a lot of pressure. You may not see it, but I am, to make sure that it is has effective contact. You ever seen these? They're exercise bands. They're like an exercise band? Yes. And the reason why I'm using this is for the tension. Am I using it to work out? No. But I figured, you know, it is just effective. You can use clamps, you can use ratchet clamps as well. I am going to use this. And I am going to quickly clamp the top, hang out, wait 5 minutes. In the meantime, during that 5 minutes, we are going to take our oak, ash, butternut, whatever you have, and soak it. We're gonna need to soak it before the bending process just to loosen the lignins, which is the protein structure that holds the wood together for the bending process. You can use whatever you have. So if you want to go to a hardware store and get a gutter that will work out, get a bin if you have, bathtubs are awesome for soaking. And just make sure that this is completely submerged and saturated, so, you know, have maybe half an inch above this. If you need to, put some weights on it so it's fully saturated inside the water, completely submerged. And we're gonna submerge this for at least 20 to 30 minutes. You can leave it for longer. There are certain woods that might develop like these little water molds inside the wood. That's okay. If you don't mind it, then it's more of an aesthetic part. It doesn't affect the bending. Before we start steaming, I just want to show you the steaming setup. We have our steam box. This one is made out of red cedar. You could do any cedar. Spanish cedar is great. I have a couple boxes of Spanish cedar at home. And you know, you have to have a steaming source. So for my steaming source, I have the Rockler Steaming Kit. I love this thing. I've used it for over 3 years now, and it's very reliable. You can get full steam within 20 minutes. If you want to quicken the pace of that, you can hook up a couple more of these and it'll lessen your time. So we're almost ready. I'm waiting for this to get to full steam right now, and then once it's at full steam, that is when you put your saturated wood inside the steam box. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about timing right now. The steaming, you don't want to over steam it because then you're borderline kilning it. We don't want that, right? It's the opposite of what we want. So when we're ready, when this gets to full steam, and you can tell because water's gonna drip out of the release port, release hole, it's just a hole. And there's gonna be steam coming out from the front of the steam box. Wait another 5 minutes or 10 minutes when you see that, and then it's gonna be at peak capacity. It's gonna be at peak heat. All right, before we begin, it's a very quick process. We're gonna talk through this. You wanna make sure you have your clamps and everything you could possibly think you might need on hand. Because when it happens, it's gonna go really quickly. Oh, that reminds me, water bottle, right there. See, you want everything on hand. So you're wondering why I need the water spray bottle. You will know when we start bending. So we want clamps of varying sources. I'm gonna mainly use these quick grip rowing clamps right here. They are fast. This is a fast process. If you have a buddy, ask them to help you out. Because, you know, honestly, one person to hold the wood down while the other one clamps it makes the whole process go smoother. I'm used to working alone, so you're gonna see me do it alone, and you must excuse me if I fumble a little bit. I'm gonna have some spring clamps, just in case I need to get into these nooks and crannies. And sometimes these guys, depending on where the wood lands, might be too big to put two. So I have some extra, just random wood scrap pieces that can fit through for more leverage. I have my extra scraps that we used before. I will use scraps over and over again until they disintegrate. So I'm using these again. And what these are for is to hold down the form, the wood to the form, adhere it for a better tension on the hold. And I have one of these giant ones just because. The spray is to help saturate the wood again when it comes out of the steamer. When it comes out of the steamer, it will dry really quickly and stiffen really rapidly. So we're gonna do this really, really fast. So here we go. You gotta make sure that your wood, the water has penetrated throughout your plank. And this one has. It's been sitting around for like probably a couple hours at this point inside water. So we're gonna put this inside our steaming box. It's at full heat. You can tell because all the steam is coming out as we open the top. And we're gonna put this in here for 10 minutes. Before we begin our bending process, which is gonna be very quick and fast paced, you wanna make sure that you have everything on hand. So you have various sorts of clamps. I have my quick grip, I have my spring clamps, has smaller little baby micro clamps, and you want your scrap wood, anything to hold it in place to adhere the wood onto the form. You want your form, you want extra clamps, you kind of just want to look around, you want your spray bottle, because when it happens, you're not going to be able to spare the 10 seconds looking around for something you might need. And that 10 seconds, that precious time you might lose, it's possible that the wood will start to dry and break. So you want to avoid that. So I think we have everything. I'm going to go through a list in my mind and we're going to bend. So I am going to get my wood right now, clear some space, and let's get to it. Ooh, hot tamales, really, really hot. So if it is too hot for your fingers, my fingers are pretty callous, so I like to feel the wood. This is gonna be quick. This is when it's most pliable, the first, whoa, ow, ow. Hot. The first probably 15 seconds. I'm gonna hear this on. And I want to use spring clamps because I'm going to adjust it. All I want it to do right now is to hold it in place. The most important part of this, you don't want it to dry out, and spraying is the base. Now remember, it doesn't have to be super perfect because we have to modify this form as we go along. So all I'm doing right now, and the most important part, is to get the wood to flatten out, because you don't want your base to be all rounded out, otherwise your iPad's just going to fall out. Even though we're going to secure it when we're done, you still don't want that. So here I have I'm actually not working as fast as I really should. I'm not tightening it all the way, and you're going to be like, why? It's because when you start to clamp, your wood needs to slide one way or the other. For me, I'm letting it slide this way where the clamp is not there yet. And this happens a lot too. You lose your grip on the clamp, it just suctions down. So this is why you have scrap for better tension. There are other ways to do this. I'm showing you my way. I like to see the bend as we go along. I like to adjust the bend as it happens. And then so now, we're almost there. I'm gonna start to clamp what we clamped here. And you can use another one of these bases. Or clamp it onto the clamp. I've done that before too. And it works perfectly fine. I always have your clamps near you. You might think this is a little messy, but because we're going to join a bend we have to modify the bend as we go along. So the first thing you need to do is accept that once you finish bending this, it will not be its final shape. Once you get that, it's usually pretty good. I'm gonna take this piece of wood, put it right here. So we're gonna flatten it out. The base is the most important part. If you have a looser bend, like I do right now, on the sides, it's okay. And you're like, why is it okay? It's okay because we're gonna release this in a couple of hours before the wood completely dries. Let's see, what do I have? I have a small one right here. Probably should need a stronger clamp, so. You see what I'm doing right now? You wanna avoid that. Wish I had one more clamp, but this is good. So I just wanna show you that it's more or less bent down. Here. Now that I clamped it, I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna put 2 more clamps on this side to make sure that the wood is adhering to the form. That's good. And then once this is done, I'm gonna leave it here for about maybe an hour, I would say, or 2, up to 4 hours. Or, you know, if you live in a fairly humid place, you can just go home and wait overnight. What I'm gonna do right now is just measure 1 inch by 1 inch. And there we have an inch. And on the other side, we're gonna do the same. Now it's weird, when you bend, sometimes the wood dries funky. You kind of just have to adjust with that. I tend to do it by eye, because I do this so often, but you can tell that it's slightly skewed. Do the best you can, that's all I can say. Okay, so here we have it. This way, easier. Just making a longer line, that's all I'm doing. Okay. Slightly angled here, so you want to try to go in the middle. You realize right here, it's not exactly 90, right? Whereas this seems closer to that. So we're gonna just adjust for that and cut it away. It's off by probably 2 millimeters. Yeah, just right up here. But that's okay. We're gonna cut this up. So what I'm gonna do is fill it in so you guys can see. It's just approximately an inch by inch square. And I am going to take these both off, and this will be our tab on which our iPad sits. If you want it to be a little bit longer, you can make it 1.5 inches, which is totally cool. It just depends on what you want. What I'm showing you is the basic design, but you know, as you go along and you decide, hey, you know what? You do a small modification, you have that right. I tend to do that a lot. A lot of my designer friends and artists
the makers frown on that. But if you know that there's something you could do to make something a little bit better. So I'm set up to cut right now, and I'm not going to show you the entire process, but I just want to show you how I start. I have my trusty hole saw, and I'm just marking it right now. And I have the wood next to it because I want to have a relatively straight line. Fun with the thing about prototyping designs is, you always have room for error. I have my picky, trusty little hacksaw here, so I just wanted to make that line, and I'm going to cut this rectangle right out. We just cut our little rectangles on each side. I tapered it a little bit, just so it goes into the slot that we're going to make right now, this modified mortise, easier, and we might need to make small adjustments to this, and we won't know until we do the dry run. So what I'm doing right now is turning this over, and I'm going to do the markings to the parallel slot, what we're going to make right now. So I want this, the iPad is going to sit on top right here. So I want to give it enough room. We have the width, this is 6 inches, right? I want to do 3.5. So I think 3.5 should be enough room. And I made a small little mark here already, so I'm making another mark just for show. And what we're going to do now is mark off. I know this is weird, but I'm going to do it on both sides. I always do this because you just never know. Like, one side of your wood could be skewing a bit while the other side is perfectly at a straight angle. You just don't know. So I have a tendency to mark both sides. See? Maybe it's your T-square, you know? Could be your T-square. Now we have the line. I'm gonna mark it 1/8 of an inch up. Now remember, it's always best to cut it smaller than larger, because once you remove the material, you just cannot get it back. There's nothing you can do about it, right? But if you cut it smaller and at a later time you need to remove a little bit more material, you can still do that. So what we're going to do is remove approximately 1/8 of an inch of material here. And we're going to measure about 1 inch inside. Because that's what we had on the other side. Double check your measurements. This is the important part, so double check. It looks as if I actually went a little bit more. So on this side it is 1 inch and 1/8. So let's mark that. It's always good to double check. I double check a lot. This says 1 inch. Underneath too. All right, now we're gonna set up to chisel this part away. What we're gonna do right now is start our chiseling process. Now remember, everybody has their own way of chiseling and carving out material. I'm just showing you mine. You can also use a router if you want to. One important thing I want to show you as well is what we're going to do is make a rounded corner on both of the sides at the ends. And the reason why we're going to do that is when we slip in the tab, you don't want a, how I call a wood blowout, where the pressure lands on both of these if there is a weakness at an intersection. So you want to take the intersection right off. It's harder to blow out the wood if it's rounded. So that's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is, you don't have to do this, this is optional, but I like to do it, especially anytime I'm chiseling any sort of mortise. I have my punch and I want to make sure that it is right on target, right? Because once you put your drill in, you're like, you can't really go back. So small punch. And I have my drill with two particular drill bits. I have a 1/8 and a 3/16. 3/16 is only for my ends. I want it slightly bigger. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. I'm gonna drill. Do this carefully. There are no backsies, so all right. I'm gonna change my bit, and what I'm gonna do right now is punch a mark approximately 1/2 inch throughout. It's good as a guide for the drill bit, and it helps after the drilling to remove the material. You want the material to be able to lift up because we have something down, and you want it to get out of your way. Because if the wood, as you're chiseling, starts to push against each other, it's going to try to split by going up and down. The last thing you want is a weak point in your bend, especially in your joint. If you want to, go ahead and make some more marks. For me, this is good. So I'm going to take my 1/8 drill. If you want to, and you want to be a little bit more cautious, get an even smaller drill bit. You know, this is right on the mark. This is the width of how big we want this, right? How wide we want this. So. Now remember, I am trying to, so what we're gonna do now is chisel out. I usually have a couple of chisels, usually my 1 inch, my 3/4, and my 1/4. I also have a bunch of carving tools. I just need really sharp, smaller plain carving tools, one straight, one angled. And stones, wheat stones, in case you need to sharpen it as you're carving. I tend to do it before, so right now they're pretty sharp, but as we all know who's done this before, as you chisel, it gets dull as you're doing it. So if you need to, it's on hand. The first thing we're going to do right now is have a mallet that you love. This is my lovely mallet. And we're going to mark it. I'm gonna go along the line that you already marked. Just make a small divot, right? Nothing too crazy, but we're trying to make a guide. Now I'm gonna go in with a much smaller flat and go in the middle. And the reason why I'm doing with the smaller chisel is because at this point, if I use my larger chisel, it's much more sturdier, heavier, more powerful. It might just blow out the tops and the backs if I put too much pressure on it. The material has nowhere to go. So right now, I'm making room for the wood to split when I chisel. It'll be easy to take the material out. I'm going to do a cross. You see how the material just slipped? That's what you want. You want it to go somewhere, just not up and not down. Making an X. And we're going to start to gouge out the material. Remove the top layer, go further down, and remove the bottom layer. Might have to chisel a wee bit more. Can almost take it out. If you have a V chisel, you can use that too. I don't have one that is smaller than an 1/8 at this point, and I don't want to risk it. So having a flat chisel right now, a small one, I'm able to see as I work along. And here we go. We have a clean cut. Well, relatively clean. And no material. I showed you a chiseling technique, which I prefer. I tend to have more control of it, but I also want to show you that there are options, and I'm gonna do one right now for you. It's gonna be super loud, so we're gonna stop talking, and I took all the measurements, everything's straight and ready, and we're just gonna route this mortise and then shape it up and clean it up in a bit. All right. Have our slot cut through here. We are going to just round off the edges, and I've been doing that. We just want to take off all the sharp edges for our through mortise and to round off the edges for our tenon right here, because I want a smoother transition when it actually joins. So that's basically what I'm doing. You could just do it by hand if you want to. What I'm going to do now is something very odd, which is I'm going to take my giant exercise band, and again, you don't have to have one of these if you have a ratchet clamp or a bunch of clamps that you want to creatively clamp together to make sure that your bend doesn't spring back too much. And I'll explain the spring back too much part in a bit. You can use. So you just basically want this not to go any further out. You don't want the radius to expand anymore. And the reason why I tell you this is we're going to now do a dry run to make sure that the slot fits your tab, your modified tenon and mortise. So I'm gonna pour hot water in this giant bowl. You can get anything, a bowl, bucket, sink, whatever you can find. It only needs to be about 1/2 inch of boiling water, and then what that's gonna do is to help the wood loosen up again to be slightly pliable. I don't want it to be very pliable, but we also don't want to lose our bend because it's gonna want to come back out the moment boiled water hits. And what we're doing right now is we're putting the wood inside. I secured the top and the other side, the opposing side where the tab is, with some bars. And we poured a little bit of hot water in here already, but we're gonna do some more, so this is what you want to do. And then you wanna wait a little while for a dry run, okay? And the reason why I am securing the tops of both of my bend is because it tends to warp. We're no longer in the form. So when you apply pressure, it wants to kind of do this. And if you apply too much pressure too quickly, the middle might snap. So all I'm doing right here is for structure. The rubber band will hold it together to prevent the form from springing back too much. Again, you can use whatever form you want to do that. Ratchet clamps, piece of cloth. You can use, of course, any sort of clamps to begin with. So it's pliable now, and I am going to slowly fit this in for a dry run. Aha! We have takeoff. So you see that it's in here, right? But this wood and this wood will want to warp itself. It's pressuring each other, right? So you can take it out of the water now. It's going to be pliable for another minute or so. So I'm going to put pressure on it now and secure it into place. And what I'm going to do is release this. And I want it to slide back as much as possible. There we go. And once you have it all the way back, again, another hand would help. But if you don't have that, just try your best to hold it together. I know it look a mess. I have some clamps on hand. We have a loose end over here. We need to push that back. We can adjust it. It's still pliable. Let's put this back. All right, that's pretty good. So just this side. Let's see if we can push it back some more. And just for prosperity. Right in the middle. Where it touches the wood, your angles. And then we have it. If you have some of your blowouts, this happened on the first bend, remember? It didn't get worse, just is. You put a bar and add some pressure, right? And put something rounded on the inside as well, and then put the bar. Nothing have anything rounded at this point, so this should do. I'm also going to show you how to fix it. So all we're doing now, right now, is plastering the wood back onto the original grain before the blowout. And this is the time to do it because it's stamped. The wood is wet and pliable. That should be good. We are almost done with this. Then comes the fun part of finishing and embellishing. I'm going to show you a few that we've done before this to show you what we can do. There's some great stuff you could do. If you see that this is also too curvy, and it's starting to warp a bit, it happens, you know. These things happen. Go ahead and secure both sides because it's still pliable. It is pliable. What you're doing right now is flattening it out again. R.
almost final iPad holder is dry. What we're gonna do right now is unclamp it. I'm just gonna unclamp all of the base and the surrounding area. I'm gonna leave this part and maybe switch it up with some spring clamps so we can start to sand this. It'll be less cumbersome. So we swapped our quick grip clamps for some spring clamps so we can start to demonstrate. We can take this off as well. The bars. So you can see it keeps it pretty straight. So we're gonna start to finish this. It's still not 100% dry. I would say that it's about 90% there. So if you need to fix anything right now, adjustment time is closing in on you, but you can still do it. If there's anything you need to do, this is the time to do it. So the next step we're going to do right now is to sand this down. And we need to have our sanding paper at hand. So I usually have a couple of grits. I have a coarse grit, which is 60 grit. I have 2 medium grits, and I'll tell you why I have 2. I have a 100 and a 120, and I have a fine grit, which is a 320. And we're gonna do this in order while we're sanding this down. I'm gonna use the heavy grit first, then the medium grit, then the fine grit. I have 2 grits because I'm gonna use the 100 to show you how to fix some of the breaks that we have here in the little holes. They're much better after clamping it down. You almost don't see it, but I still know it's there. I know it's a weak point, so we're gonna fix it, and I'm gonna show you how to do that. You can use wood paste if you want to. We're gonna make our own wood paste. That way we can have a similar color, similar texture, and it'll still be open. Sand with a force. You can sand it any way you want. Some people rotate in circular motion. I sometimes do that. Since my grain is going very vertical, I'm going to sand it like this. And it doesn't have to be a very thorough job because you're going to run through this with the medium grit and you're going to run through this with the fine grit. Before you get to the medium or fine grit, the weak spots are being sanded down right now and you can almost not see them anymore. As you're sanding with your coarse grit, the weak spots and the splits also be sanded down. I'm going through one last short run with my heavy grit. And now, this is the time I fix some of the corrections. So, I make my corrections. So right here, we have, you can almost not tell anymore, right? So let me see if I can show you. Right here, there's a small crack, and it's almost not noticeable. I'm digging my fingernails in it. So right here, there's a little bit right here as well if I dig my fingernails in it. So we're going to try to fix these, and I'm going to tell you how to right now. Again, you could use wood paste. I always find that using wood paste from the store, I'm generally unhappy about the coloration and the texture. So I like making my own. Remember these little rectangles and squares that you cut off while we're making the tab? If you find them now, use them. This will guarantee that the same wood you have, the same color, and the same, well, not the same texture, but the same type of wood will be used for the patching. I'll just call it patching. I have a little bit of Gorilla Glue right now. I like to use Tight Bond 2 water resistant, the green kind, because it's slightly lighter than regular Tight Bond, which has a yellow tint, and I always find that it changes the color a little bit. So I'm just dabbing a little bit of that Gorilla Glue. Again, you could use Type Bond, water resistant, the green kind. And what you want to do is I have a little bit here. I'm just going to take a medium grit, this is 100, and I'm going to take the same wood, this white oak, and I'm going to make oak dust. Just sanding it down to a fine powder. And make as much as you deem necessary. You can always come back, right? Get a piece of scrap or anything. I have this just lying around. You can use your fingers. And you just want to mix that in. Not too much glue, not too much dust. When I get it to the texture that you like, I'm just use my fingers because I can feel it. I don't need a lot. They're just thin cracks. If you make this too thick, it doesn't stay on. I find that dries too quickly. You make it too watery, you don't get the consistency you want, and you still see the divots and holes. So this might take a little experimentation. And what I'm going to do is use that wood paste that we just made and put some pressure and just grind it in the areas that we know are there. There we go. Just like pushing it in. And we're going to sand all the itty bitty hanger-oners outside of the patch. Turn it around. We had a few spots here as well. Let me get some more wood glue. And you know, after sanding, it's really hard to find. I know where they are. I've been staring at it too long. But I always do this after the first coarse sanding. If you can't find your flaws, try doing it after the second medium sanding. Very tiny. You almost don't see it. And my glue is drying. So you might at this point want to do a different patch, but you see a little bit here. And this is going to dry really fast. For us, it's going to dry within 30 minutes. It's just so minute. And then we're going to wait 30 minutes and we're going to finish the sanding with our second grit, which is 150. One here. Nope. My bad. 120 grit, the medium grit. And what I have is 220. And then finally, we're going to do the 320. And this is basically just the final finishing. What I'm going to do right now is go ahead and sand the whole thing, including these guys. Our little pasted up glue putty fill-in. And once this is sanded down with a fine grit, you will almost not see it at all. You kind of have to stare, especially with the finish. And we're going to talk about finishes very soon, because once this is all sanded out, we're ready to put some oil on it and also put some embellishes on it, such as leather, extra wood for stability, any sort of design staining. Yeah, this would be the time right before the oiling or the polishing. Totally up to you. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and then I'm going to use this, I just want to show you, and go over what I just did. And this is what this looks like when it's done. It looks really, really smooth, and we're ready for embellishes and the final either staining job or oiling. You can also use poly. So right now, this will give a little bit. You see a bit of a gap. We're gonna fix that right now. What you can do is, I want it to, and that's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna do embellishes right now. I'm gonna use a piece of Padak, because I love the orangey red color, to put on top of this, just to give it a little bit of a pop. And it's also gonna help the joint. So I just cut a really thin piece of Padak. You want this really tight. Super tight. Just wiping the glue all over my table right now. It's nice to have a rag. I usually do. I love just small, tiny pops of color. I have, right here is a dried version, and I put a little bit of scrap paddock here. It's very bright. I like pops in color. And it has two functions. The first one is to secure your joint, right? What you have right here is your lip, and then now that we put a thicker piece of lip by adding this paddock, it won't ever pop back out. So that's the function of it. It's also pretty. I like my colors. I just want to show you what it would look like. I have a big iPad I brought with me, and it would just sit just like this. You can also, this is pretty neat, actually put it like this and put your iPad like that as well. So if you want a shorter viewing perspective, this is also great. We also want to secure the base. I know that it's stable on stable ground, but you just never know. If your floors are uneven and you happen to put this there and it wants to go back a little bit this way, you want to make sure that if you knock it over, grab a coffee, and you go like this, you want it to stay put. You just want it to always be level. So we're gonna secure this by putting a really tiny base. Again, I wanted to match the pad off, and I love the contrast. We're gonna put a teeny weeny bit right here. We're just gonna glue it up. Take your measurements before you do that. I did. I marked it after putting the iPad on, and that's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna glue the leather, and we're gonna glue this like small slab of triangular wood that I just cut with my bandsaw, and I sanded it down so there's a small dip. I don't know if you can see it, but it's very minutia. It's very small. And you know, if you don't want to go through that part and you just want to leave it perfectly rectangular, that's fine too. When it adheres on, the top and the bottom points, some points may not meet up, but it should be secure enough right in the middle if you put enough glue and you let it set in time that it would work. So let's do the base first. I have a rag here to wipe my glue up. Spray it with a little water. I like to remove glue with a damp cloth, as I said before. Still see a little bit of the imperfections from when we patched it with our homemade wood paste putty, I should say, not silly putty. I have kids, so there's silly putty lying around our house, unfortunately, and on my chairs. And all I'm doing right now is securing it. You may need to adjust it a little bit because, well, that's gonna be some cleanup. There we go. Now when you use these quick grip clamps, as convenient as they are, I love them. They tend to move your final positioning. Don't get frustrated. I sometimes used to kind of grip it just lightly until I know that I'm happy with the position of this, and then there you go. What we're gonna do right now is we did the base, everything is good, we're gonna leave it to dry. You could usually work with it for 30 minutes, but again, we're gonna give it at least an hour before we do the oil treatment to seal our final product. What I'm doing right now is what we did before. We use a little bit of resin with our cork glue up. And I didn't do a line this time. I did a little bit of an L. And I'm going to repeat this with my 5-minute resin. We're going to cheat a little bit like I did before. I'm just following the pattern. And we're going to take a piece of scrap, which we have. Have your scraps lying around, and you want to mix it well, and you want to get your proportions correctly. When I do a large job, I use scales to make sure it's either 2 to 1, 1 to 1, whatever the manufacturer requires. For something this small, as long as the proportions are more or less even, the chemical reaction for the seal should be good. So we're just gonna apply this to our leather. You can use 30 minutes, you can use whatever you have on hand. I'm gonna take this and wipe this down really quickly. Resin just tends to harden and becomes really hard to get out. So what we're gonna do is put the last embellishment right here. And put it on the edge. A little bit is sticking out all over, which is what I want, because it's easier to just cut the leather at the end. I have my scrap, right? And you want the leather to adhere, so just gonna get a spring clamp because it's easy. 2, you can put another one in the middle. I'm looking around. There we go. To make sure that it's very secure. And I'm using 5 minutes, so this should be done, but we're gonna wait for everything to set in, and we're gonna wait for the glue up for the base to set in. So an hour later, we're gonna come back and we're gonna finally oil this baby up. I think I have my fine grit, which is 320, and I'm gonna run this through, and then we're finally up to the point where we seal it, and we're done. Yay! So excited. So after all that, we're at the final part. All right, it's looking good. And our little base now matches our little top lip here. I think it looks pretty awesome. So there are different types of finishes, as you can imagine. And I ran through a bunch of them. You can use hard oil. I love hard oil. Monocoat is fabulous too. Regular beeswax, polyurethane, boiled linseed oil, tongue oil. But today we're going to use some old-fashioned Danish oil. This one has a really, really light tint to it, and I like the way it looks. It doesn't look this dark when you put it on. It's actually quite light.
Make sure you have good ventilation. It can be an irritant, Danish oil, so I put on gloves. I have lots of scrap cotton that I take from my house when things start to rip, and this is from my old pillowcase. I tend to recycle all my stuff. And all we're gonna do is try to get the wood, the oak, and we're gonna skip the lip part because I don't want this to be any darker. For this part, we're just gonna use a little bit of hard oil. But first, I'm going to just go ahead and rub the Danish oil on this. There are different techniques. You can brush it on, you can put it in a bowl. I might go over this with a brush just to get the nooks and crannies. But I'm doing it this way for now. Just being really careful as to not get it on my paddock. You can also seal it with tape. That might not be a bad idea. So I'm gonna put this on hold for a second. I just happen to have some handy. Let's seal this. Just a little bit of painter's tape. Scotch tape works well too. And then what I'm gonna do is for the areas that I miss, I'm gonna go over it with a really fine painting brush. This one's too small. It should be good. I'm gonna seal it both ways. Okay. So we'll put some tape on the lip when we're ready to do that. So right now, I have this sealed. I'm just gonna go right in there. Might be wise to saturate this. I'm gonna spread it all around. Yeah, this is the messy part, right? I have extra rags for cleanup as well. So if you have too much, it's okay. The wood usually soaks it in pretty nicely. I usually find that to be the case. But when you use the other end, the dry part, and I like to have my sanding paper, honestly, around, because if you see an area where you just forget, or it's just not as fine as you like I see some streaks right here, you could still rub it out right now. You could just brush off the dust and quickly stain it again. Alright, so let's do the other side right here. There's a little blue patch. What happens to you? Happens to me sometimes. You can't see it because it has no finish. It's not stained, but you can sand it out while you're finishing and fix anything that you see that you don't like. So we get another cloth, get up the dust, and continue. Bit more oil. So you're wondering what I'm going to do with the leather. For the leather, I'm just going to put a little bit of hard oil on that along with the paddock, and I always find that it works really well. You can also use beeswax. Oops. Just spilled some. Might be nice to have a bowl. Okay. Yeah, most of it. I'm gonna seal the top. Because I don't want to darken the paddock than it normally needs to be. And it will be darkened once I put the hard oil on. And you're wondering, well, Jenny, why don't you just use hard oil for the whole thing? You can! I just happen to like the really minor hint of the Danish oil with the walnut. Probably just like maybe a 20% walnut stain on this. I think it brings out the oak. But I actually did one with just the hard oil, and it looks fabulous. It really does. It looks good. So, there we go. I'm just getting to the nooks and crannies right now. Okay. Don't forget your sides. Very important. Okay, we got the sides. I'm taking some excess out, and we're going to just start on the inside. You don't have to follow me through this entire process. So what I have right now is I put a little bit of hard oil, and this hard oil that I have is a little bit of beeswax, tongue oil, linseed oil, mixed together and condensed. There's some nut oil, I think maybe macadamia in this as well. So I'm gonna take this off and just gonna take a little bit of this oil, let it go down, and just rub it on the paddock. It is very bright. It's like turn your eye away bright. And I'll put some on. The leather, actually a great leather conditioner, in case you didn't know. When it dries, it makes the leather extremely supple. Brings out this really nice, rich hue. And then we have a brush. And this brush, make sure it's clean. I'm gonna dip it in my Danish oil here. And I'm actually just gonna rub this out very carefully. Get in that lip, the nook and cranny that you can't get in by just rubbing it. And I also don't want to squeeze excess into it, because then it's gonna dry and it'll be a little funny looking. So all I'm doing right now is carefully going over the mini crevices that maybe no one will ever see, but you will know that it's there. Yes, very much like painting, right? Get in the nooks and crannies. Filling in all the nooks and crannies with our Danish oil. I would allow this to dry for at least 12 hours. 24 is probably best. You can also go through with it again by using a very fine grit, anywhere between 220 to 400, and sand it down very lightly and go over again with Danish oil and hardwood oil or whatever finish that you choose. We have our
finished product right here. Our two-way bent wood iPad holder sits this way if you want a little bit more height, and it sits this way if you want a lower recline for your iPad holder. This has been really neat. I'm super excited to have you watch this video, and I hope that you truly enjoy making this bent wood iPad holder with me. I hope that you take my design and make it your own. Get creative, embellish it, stain it, paint it, go absolutely nuts. Remember, this is your project too. So here we have it. I actually kind of like it this way. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I am Jenny Wong-Stanley from Art of Plants. You can reach out to me at artofplants.com or jennywongstanley.com. Email me anytime and we can geek out about bending wood together.